Welcome to the fourth episode of Soul Path, the moon in your birth chart. Thomas and I are taking a look at the moon and all of the signs in hopes of helping our listeners understand how they can better connect to their intuition, to their emotional security, to their inner wisdom. In episode 2, we started with the fire moon. In episode 3, we started with the earth moons. And now we are moving on to the air moons. So if you have your moon in Gemini, Libra, or Aquarius, this is the episode for you. So in the first episode, when we gave an overview of the podcast, we spoke a little bit about each of the elements. And in the element air, we've got an energy of intellect. It's deeply connected to communication and to interaction, not just interaction with others, but interaction with one's surroundings. And Thomas, I'm curious if you would agree, but I think one thing that runs in common with Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius is this ability to process the emotions intellectually. It's an ability to detach and view something from an objective standpoint. Would you agree?
Yeah, Kadisha, I totally agree with that. And the processing of emotions, that is really a theme that we can see in all three signs. Yeah. And in particular, it's getting interesting when we then look, what does that mean when your moon is in Gemini, to start with this? What does it mean for processing emotions and feelings? And maybe we get started with this sign.
Yeah, I'm eager to get started. As you know, I have my moon in Gemini.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have a deep connection.
So that is your theme today. So yeah, so maybe you get started with, and I'm really curious, what does it mean, so from your experience, to have the moon in Gemini?
Well, Gemini is the part of the zodiac where the soul, it's grounded. You know, the zodiac just left Taurus. It's moving into Gemini. And this is the soul, because it's grounded and it has an understanding of its resources. It's now finally having the security to begin to take in its surroundings, to notice what's going on outside of the self. So Gemini, to me, is a sign that is deeply connected to description, to really being aware of one's environment and taking the time to describe that environment. So for me, someone who has their moon in Gemini might either think a lot about their feelings, or they may talk a lot about their feelings, but there's some kind of description, some kind of engagement on an intellectual and communicative level regarding one's feelings. And to me, that can also make a person appear detached or stoic, even because they have such an objective awareness of their feelings. So others may perceive them as not necessarily feeling something or caring about something as much as others do. But in my experience, they care just as much. It's just that a lot of the processing is happening in the head, where others might be experiencing it more in the stomach or expressing it more outwardly, whereas the Gemini might express it more mentally. Now, I know you and I have our moons on the same axis. You have yours in Sagittarius and mine in Gemini, and Gemini and Sagittarius are right across from each other. So perhaps you can also, although your moon is a fire moon, relate to this deep connection to communication and sharing ideas.
Absolutely, Kadisha. So for me, the fire moon in Gemini, or Gemini in particular, also represents the intellectual part, and even the five senses I would associate it with, which we take in information. And here with moon in Gemini, this intellectual part now comes together with our emotional part. And as you rightly said, the intellect is kind of dominating a bit in the appearance to others. But there's also, as you said, this ability to express thoughts and also emotions, and this particularly also in a spiritual context. So that's why I'm not surprised that you are here also making this podcast and offering your service to the people. And with your fantastic way of describing it, I think you touch people's hearts.
Thank you.
Sure, yeah. And what I also associate to moon in Gemini is that there is a certain restlessness, you know, there are
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
so many things, yeah, in the outside world, impulses that people take in, yeah, and not sure if you can share that, but this is my observation. So it doesn't really matter what it is, yeah, at the beginning, it's something new, and there is this interest and openness and intaking, and so people are very knowledgeable usually, so they can really share with you a lot of interesting facts. And so conversations are always, you know, never boring. And they also are very spontaneous. Yeah. And they are keen in exchanging ideas, how one could implement certain topics and so on. So they are really the creative forces that could also, from my perspective, initiate things. Yeah. And then, also let it go. Yeah. Once this is on the way.
Yeah, there were so many things you said that I would love to jump into. Just being a Gemini moon, I could expand on it for ages. Everything you said resonates with me also on a soul level, you know, going back and forth between two options. That reminds me actually of the Two of Swords in the Tarot, you know, going back and forth between two options, but also because Gemini is kind of a jack of all trades, interested in many different things. So like you also said, there's an opportunity for really good conversation because they tend to know something about everything, you know, because they've probably taken an interest in it at some point. So what I think as someone with a moon in Gemini, when we're in relationship with someone who has a moon in this sign, be it a child or a partner, one thing I appreciate is the ability to ask questions, even if the questions make the other person uncomfortable. I'm always happy when I'm engaging with people who are willing to talk about the things that are important to me or seem relevant or critical to me, because it helps me also to understand my feelings and, you know, that oscillating between two things that can happen, that indecision that can happen when one has so many options, it tends to calm if I'm engaging with people who give my desire to ask questions, my desire to understand, to think about, to talk about, to write about things, space. Do you have any suggestions, Thomas, for anyone who's in relationship with someone who has a Gemini moon?
So I can only add to what you just reflected on. And from my experience, because of this huge interest in new things that leads a bit, one could perceive as a restlessness or so, it might be good to reflect also how much time do I devote to my partner or children. So in a sense that that is time just to be and to listen or to just share the time and the intimacy and being together. So that is something that could be easily a bit overlooked because there are so many interesting things in life to share. And it's also a good foundation from my experience for any relationship with a partner who has moon in Gemini, that you together also have a kind of project that you do together, a topic, a common theme, you know, that you share, and that you can bring in your enthusiasm, your energy. It also is a good foundation. And yeah, and you mentioned the dialogue about feelings. I can only encourage to be really brave here, although it might not feel so naturally at the beginning, but this will also bond you to the partner. And maybe we can, Kadisha, round it up with one question people can ask themselves when having moon in Gemini. So one question could be just to reflect a bit, how active am I? What are my topics that I'm currently dealing with either in my thoughts or also practically? And what are the times that I dedicate to my family, in a sense, there is nothing to do. It's just being there and relaxing. And that maybe is a good question.
Yes, I like both of the questions you asked. The one before about intimacy, as well as this question about how active am I and spending time just being. I can relate to all of those and look forward to reflecting on those myself as well. So why don't we move on to Libra, who also, again, is the air moon. There's air energy. But this is the soul wanting to understand the self through relationships. It's looking at others to help us perceive what it is that we want and who we are, and what it is that we don't want and who we are not. There's such a great opportunity, I find, with the Libra moon to understand the self better, because there's such a strong focus on others when one thinks of Libra. But I think in focusing on others, there's also an opportunity to really get to know the self better.
Absolutely. And if we look at our birth chart, then Libra is the sign that opens a quadrant that is dedicated to the soul and soul development. And so it's the first sign that is, so to say, embracing this topic. And here we have this Venus energy. Venus is the ruler of Libra with an airy quality. And for me, that stands for, as you said, encounters, relationships, and also the spiritual parts of life. And the interesting thing with having your moon in Libra is that by connecting with other people, you can actually sense and feel this quality, which you cannot without. So it's an interesting constellation. So actually, by getting into any kind of relationships, people, of course, will gain some experiences. And these experiences will help to understand themselves, because the other person always is also a kind of, I would say, a mirror. And so a person with moon in Libra can learn from every interaction with other people, can learn about itself. Can you relate to that, Kadisha?
Yes, definitely. Again, yeah, relating to people helps one to really deeply understand the self. And I think that's just such an important point for us to bring up here, because often in relationships, we can kind of lose sight of who we are out of a desire to fit in or a desire to belong. But in astrology, belonging is inherent, because we recognize ourselves to all be a part of the same source. And fitting in is a construct of the cultural society, which we'll get into more of that when we talk about Aquarius. But in my opinion, Libra moons, it's just so important for a Libra moon to really embrace the polarity of Aries and really be grounded in their own identity and in the truth of who they are before they begin to engage with others, so that in their desire for harmony, for balance, they do not lose sight of who they are. In a desire to engage with community, they can still be grounded in the understanding of who they are. Because you brought up this great point that Libra is the beginning of a new quadrant. So Aries through Virgo, these are energies we consider to be, more inside of the self, more subjective. And Libra is the soul branching out into the objective, into the external world. And so when the soul takes this huge step of moving out into the external, it's important that it's still grounded within the truth of who that individual is. Is it the case in your school of astrology, Thomas, that Libra can sometimes in its lower vibration be connected to a desire to please, or such a strong desire for harmony that they can sometimes lose sight of who they are? There's also maybe an energy of high expectations of the self and others, and just this opportunity to express one's needs, almost as if Libra is saying, come speak up, express your needs, while at the same time understanding and recognizing others' needs. Would you agree?
Yes, Kadisha. So that is indeed exactly one of the dynamics with this sign and the moon in this sign. And this is in particular good to know or to be aware of when entering into relationships, because the effect could be, if I'm not aware of that, and this is actually not a big thing, it's just think about it and look at this. But if I don't do it, then there is a tendency that I somehow make myself a bit dependent on my partner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then it is the situation that the relationship and how comfortable I feel in it always depends a bit on how much my partner really meets this expectation. And yeah, so I agree with you, Khadija. This is an important topic here to mention.
And you just spoke on such an important point. I mean, something that cannot be overlooked with Libra moons or moon in the 7th house, which is this topic of dependency and being aware of that and making sure that one is living interdependency as opposed to codependency. But you and I, we could talk for hours on this, on these topics. So before I open a new chapter, because that is just such a great point. Why don't you give our Libra moons some questions to reflect on?
Sure. So 2 questions come into my mind. And the one is simple question. How much do I value myself?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So just to reflect on that. And you could even, to make it more intense, you could do it any moment you have a mirror in front of you and you look into the mirror, not just to see if your hair is correct and so on, but also to look you in the eyes and to ask this question, how much do I value myself? And maybe another question that actually comes along with it is, how much do I know about my personality? So I'm convinced you know all of this. It's always a matter of, do I have put my focus on it or my attention? And sometimes in daily life, we have to function and to work. And as a Gemini moon person, you have then to balance a lot, and you may lose sight on that. So the question is, do I know my personality?
And again, I have to say, these are great questions that each of the signs could be asking themselves, no matter where a person has their moon. I think those are such valuable questions for any soul to engage with. And as we move into the sign of Aquarius, I think this topic of how much do I know about my personality and how much do I value myself is particularly important, because with Aquarius, the soul is moving into the space of humanity. It's our friendship, our goals, and our objectives. But particularly, this is the soul also becoming aware of conditioning. It's becoming aware of the effect society has had on its decision-making, on its goals, on how it expresses itself in the outside world. And Uranus rules Aquarius. And often in the schools of astrology that I've studied, Uranus is viewed as the rebel. It's innovation. It's the pioneer. So Jupiter in connection with Sagittarius is the visionary, and Uranus is more the pioneer, the trailblazer, going new paths. And here, where the soul is wanting to throw off conditioning, it's bringing expertise, so all that the soul has learned, together with intuition. And so Aquarius is such a special sign because, in my opinion, it's able to move along a spectrum, a combination of desiring independence and freedom, as well as desiring community. And so, in my opinion, often Aquarius moons will move between the spectrum, wanting to be amongst others and to enjoy community, while at the same time needing time to pull back and be with the self and engage with one's own creativity and just live that energy of independence and freedom.
Absolutely, Khadija. And what is so interesting in this constellation with Moon in Aquarius, the Uranus quality that you mentioned already, Uranus, the ruler of Aquarius, has a driving force that is quite interesting, because on the one hand, it will, so to say, change from structure into chaos if needed. If this structure is too fixed and needs change, then it will revert it into chaos. Also, where there is maybe peace for too long, and don't get me wrong, peace is important and I love it. It's more in the sense of, if these things go too smooth and the things that need to be outspoken are not outspoken, then this power will actually drive you in a situation that you have to have this dispute and to clarify it. So because that is the true life. So there's always a positive and a negative side. And that is the interesting fact on this, in this energy. And we find it then also in our lives, that Uranus has this, or the Aquarius sign has this quality to suddenly change things. Events happen out of nothing and change. And with this change, as you mentioned, then comes, so to say, the development, something new out of it. Mm-hmm. And that is, by the way, a strength and a quality of the owner of Moon in Aquarius, as I see it, that they have this power and this ability to really recover from such events that all of a sudden everything changes and they now have to find new orientation. They have this strong power to recover from that and then being even stronger afterwards. And they have another strength I want to mention, and that is they have the ability to deal with extreme situations. I always have this picture in mind of the emergency room, every second counts, and then there are lives at risk and so on, and people are shouting and demanding and all at the same time. And there is this one person in the middle that is there grounded and says, first of all, this person do that. Afterwards, we go there and I deal with you just in a second. And they do not lose their temper or something like this. So that is the quality also that I really appreciate from Aquarius or Moon in Aquarius. Can you relate to that?
Yes, definitely, definitely. I like that image. And sometimes Aquarius is just so focused on work that they have this quality that we spoke of in Gemini, that a lot is happening in the mind. They're more engaged mentally, possibly, than stereotypically emotionally, so to speak, which gives them this edge, as you say, of being able to remain calm in very difficult and disruptive situations. And they're either able to delegate, or some of them will just get in there and be like, you know what, I'll just do it myself. It's faster that way. It's amazing. And what I like about what you said was this Uranus's ability to bring chaos when necessary. That reminds me of the Tower card in the Tarot, destroying towers and old constructs that no longer work so that something new can be built up in its place. So sometimes when a person sees the Tower card, they think it's something negative, but it's actually like removing debris, removing old ways of thinking and being that no longer serve this more developed soul, and making space for things that fit the current vibration of that person. And it reminds me of volcanoes or geysers, I think sometimes because these are so heated, we associate them more with the fire element, but I think we also underestimate the role that air is playing in these volcanoes, in these geysers. And particularly with volcanoes, I think it connects well to how you describe that energy of chaos coming about in order to bring something new. Because as we know, after a volcano, that's when you have the most nutrient ground for new life to grow. So I really appreciated that metaphor. And even for those of us who don't have Aquarius moons, Aquarius is somewhere in our birth chart, which means this energy, this Uranus or Aquarius or 11th house energy is moving in some way in our lives, which I'm grateful for. I think we all need a bit of a shaking up every once in a while. I mean, would you agree, Thomas, that I think with this shaking up, that even though it's disconcerting at the time, that it also kind of honors how far a person has come. And it's almost like the universe saying, what we've been putting up with thus far no longer fits, and we're ready for something better, something new.
Yeah, Khadija, I can relate to that, what you said. And that's why it's also important if you enter into a relationship with a person that has Moon in Aquarius, to understand, so to say, the personality, that person brings with you, with it, and the personality that person has. So, and two things I would like to mention here that would probably help to increase that understanding. So if you have your Moon in Aquarius, you most probably feel a bit different to what society shows. And you cannot fully connect to all this, but to your own personality. And that is good, and it's something you really can accept and be happy with. And it's something you should share then with your partner. So to speak about it, to talk about it, and so that the partner is really in the full picture of what's going on. And what's also a good way to live your relationship is to be just here and now in the moment, and not to make too many plans of the future, because this is not what exactly a Moon in Aquarius needs and wants to do. So important is what's happening now. It doesn't mean that you don't have a future or should not also have ambitions and goals, but the focus should always be on the here and now, and then the next step that will come. This way you take a bit the pressure out that could occur if you plan too much and you raise expectations, which this is against the idea of freedom, independence, that is within this energy. So these are the 2 points I would like to share regarding relationships with a moon in Aquarius person. And one more thought, Khadija, I would like to share on parents, who have a child with moon in Aquarius. So imagine that you have this little child, no matter what age, but already in an early age, that has this energy that we were just talking about. So that might feel like or appear like it's nagging a lot or provoking some conflict and maybe a bit, not so easygoing as compared to your neighbors or so. And this could be because, no matter of the age, this energy of independence is already there. And actually the ability to live an independent life is already there. It's only that, of course, as a child, you need to grow up and and during this phase, you need a companion, and parents in this sense, I would see as to be a good companion to their children and to have this awareness that they suffer a bit, the children, because they cannot live this, independent life yet. It's too early, So this was one thought I wanted to share with you on parents being parents.
Yeah, I appreciate that too. What you said in the partnership portion about being in the moment, being in the present moment, and also what you said about children, because I think sometimes parents do have these moments where they're not quite sure what is it my child needs and how can I better help them, and understanding the moon can be really helpful in parenting because like you said, these are old souls in young bodies because in astrology, we have this understanding that the physical age doesn't necessarily reflect the emotional maturity or the spiritual maturity. So I think that's a great point you bring up in such a powerful and, as we said, independent sign as Aquarius. So Thomas, give us a couple questions that we can reflect on as Aquarius moons. What questions could help them tap more deeply into their inner being and inner wisdom?
Yes. So one question that comes into my mind is here to ask yourself, how good am I in listening to my inner voice? So how good am I in listening to my inner voice? Because we create awareness of what's going on in our inner self and we become aware of what our moon, so to say, is telling us and making us feel and perceive. That is a very good starting point to a more broader consciousness. And another question relates a bit to what we just discussed regarding relationships and also being parents, but in particular relationships, is the question, how do I deal with closeness when I'm close to people? How does it feel? How long can I feel comfortable with it? When does it maybe change? And then the feeling comes, I need to leave the room just to take a deep breath. So, because that is the dynamic, of moon in Aquarius that you experience. And the more you are aware of it, the better you understand yourself, your reaction to certain situations. And then if you are brave enough, the better you can explain it to your partner.
Yeah, great questions for reflection. And I feel like the first question also helps one really engage with their intuition and really tap in to that space, which is exactly what we're wanting with the moon. So thank you, Thomas, for accompanying me on this journey. It's been also great with our listeners, and I hope that you all will post below where your moon is. Let us know whether you learned something new about your moon, and Also, if there's something we didn't share that you've learned or recognized about your moon, please do share that with us in the comments below, and let this be a great conversation amongst us all, amongst our Soul Path community. So thank you, Thomas, and we're going to meet again in episode 5 when we get into the water moons. So moon in Cancer, Scorpio, Pisces, and I'm excited for that, and I hope those listening will tune into those moons as well.
Thank you, Kadisha. See you there.
Yeah, speak soon.